Guys, stick around to the very end for a little bonus recording that I used in one of my reels this week. I think it hits just right if you've ever felt like it's all a bit too much. This is Jody J. Sperling, host of Becoming a Household Name podcast. Today, I am doing it as a live episode on YouTube first, so you're able to check it out there. I will ultimately use this through my audio feed, which is where most of you are listening. But the whole focus over the last 3 weeks has been using organic social media to reach more readers, to engage with a larger audience. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today, is how it's gone the past week using primarily Instagram to reach a new audience of readers. I'm going to quickly recap the strategies I'm using, but I'm not going to go into as much depth on the strategies because I've talked about that a lot in the past 2 weeks. So first and foremost, I believe, and I think there's good evidence for the fact that Instagram is the number one place for readers to find new authors. And I apologize, we have 3 new kittens. When we started getting kittens, it was like an addiction we couldn't stop. So we've got Fern, who is somewhere around 13 or 14 weeks old. And then we have Angus, who is probably about 7 weeks now. And we actually just picked up Angus's litter mate. We named him Kosai, which, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is Japanese for wild goose. So we'll just call him Goose. So we've got Fern, we've got Angus, and we've got Goose. It's really fun having the kittens around. They are a bucket load of energy. One of the coolest things was when we got Goose, he had been separated from Fern for about 3 weeks. So we expected we would have to do kind of a normal introduction. And I don't know if it's just that Goose is the kind of cat who defied the normal kitty routine, but within 2 hours of having him home, we decided to introduce him to Fern, and they got along like gangbusters. They were having so much fun together. We were worried that Fern was going to have trouble, so we just had Goose and Angus alone in the bathroom last night, their litter box, their food. We thought we would give them some time to bond. But this morning, when I let Angus out, then Goose is just meowing and mewling at the door. Finally, I decided I would open it a little bit because Fern was standing right there. And lo and behold, like, they're sniffing at each other, they're playing a little bit. And I opened the door and let Goose go. And all 3 of them are getting along and playing. And that means you might hear them in the background. So anyways, cat lovers, woo-wee, you understand. For the rest of you, you're like, why in the world would you get 3 cats? It's a sickness. Okay, Instagram. I believe that it's the number one place to meet new readers. And like I said, there's pretty good evidence for that. For one, Meta is the best advertising platform for people who have limited budgets. You can actually find customers and be profitable advertising on Meta. Try doing that anywhere else. You'll find really quickly that it's, if not impossible, very, very difficult. So I went through the Author Marketing Mastery Through Optimization program that Steve Piper started 2 years ago and used it with pretty good success. I didn't have a large catalog of books. In fact, when I started, I only had 2 published books. And so I decided I would include pre-order books in my original offer. And I was able to be profitable for a fairly reasonable period of time. Then the profits started to drop out. I had difficulty adjusting my ads. I focused on adding new books. I got myself up to the point where I had a 5-book deal that I could offer. And then I just really dropped out of profit altogether. I thought, I cannot continue to spend this kind of money. I'm going to break my family. I do believe if I'd kept going, it would have been fine. But I just realized I can't do that. And so I apologize. There's a little toy that was going to keep quacking and chirping forever. So I used all of the money that I felt I could, trying to figure it out. And I needed to shift. Not only that, but I had a fairly low return on readers who bought the deal and then stayed actively engaged. And I realized I needed to focus on organic social media. That's not entirely even accurate in timing. I shifted all of my energy over into live events. And what I realized there is that I paid for a table, I paid for travel to get to the event. Once I was there, some of my natural selling talents really showed up, and I was able to talk to people and sell books. And so I would be profitable at those events, but there's a couple of drawbacks. If you're doing only live events and trusting that to build word of mouth and your readership base, one, you have to be able to capture email addresses so that you can stay in touch with those people. That is a challenge in the selling process. If you're like, hey, do you like to read? And they say, yeah, and you pitch them the book and they're like, cool, I'll buy one. Then after they've agreed, be like, hey, can I get your email address? It's a step I've never been comfortable with. Maybe it's something I need to get better at, but it's a fairly low conversion rate from selling the book to actually getting somebody's email address. Not only that, but you're typically selling them the most books you can, and that might mean that you have nothing left to sell them afterwards. So that too is a challenge. But the most important and the biggest challenge with doing live events and trusting that to be how you build your life as a household name as an author is that you can only be in one place at one time. And so every weekend, you're going to get a chance to rub elbows with several hundred, maybe several thousand people. And you're probably going to sell somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 books. And that's slow going. You need to be able to figure out how to sell through other channels. That is where I came in to the process of organically reaching out through social media. And I've known from the moment that I started this that I have an agenda. I'm not going to try to lie and say that I'm just here to enrich the community through my interactions. I'm here to enrich the community that is interested in my perspective and my point of view and how that plays out through my novels. And this is true of me. So I want to share it with you because you may find that this resonates with you. I'm not the world's best at having logical debates or arguments and conveying my point of view. I'm not linear. I don't think linearly. I think in kind of odd constellations. My friend Andrew once actually told me that that's how I presented all of my information to the world is I would tell a little anecdote about this and an anecdote about that and a story about this. And through those things, you could start to build a constellation that represented my worldview. But in fiction, that's exactly what you want to do is you want to create a story that people sink into and that they're exposed to a worldview they might not otherwise have been exposed to. And when it's done well, guys, this is a really profound way to have an impact on minds. There are some things that I could tell you just on the surface about myself. One is that children are precious. Your own children are really precious, but your spouse is your number one. That's something that I believe. That's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking through, something I put into practice with my wife. She's the one I married. She's the one that I chained myself to gladly for the rest of this life. And we talked about having kids. But when I met her, I wasn't thinking about kids. I wasn't thinking about building a family. I was thinking about being in love with my best friend and wanting to spend the rest of my life with her. And so I've always tried to keep her first and foremost. Now, telling you that right now, you most likely have a response one way or the other. Oh, yeah, I totally feel the same. Or no, children are the apple of my eye, and it's all about them. If that's the end of the conversation, all you did was compare your worldview to my worldview. However, if I write a book like Buckshot Blast and the Goldfish Getaway that talks about children and the importance of children, and it talks about spouses and the importance of spouses, and I start to just fill the book in with a story about spouses and children and the sacrifices we make, then at the end of the book, you will have been confronted with multiple points of view, a whole worldview, a constellation, and you'll be able to have seen these ideas in practice, the friction they cause, the tension that results from them, possibly the loss of life and limb. And so that's a great way to have that conversation without telling you what I think, but presenting you with the way I see the world. A lot of you know this, and so I'm not going to tell the whole story, but the whole reason the Luke and Time Mysteries exists is because I had a friend named Justin who knew that I was a raging Jesus freak Christian, and he challenged me to write a character who held the exact opposite points of view as I do. And that's how Luke was born. Luke is a woman. She's a feminist. She is irreligious, possibly like actively opposed to religion. And I mean, I just built in her everything that wasn't me. And in doing that, I changed myself. Fiction actually changed me, even though I was the author of the fiction. It changed many of the things I believe. If you ask me now, I would tell you, and there's no conversation, this is just the nonfiction part, I would tell you that I still believe in God, that I believe that there is something for us after this life, and that I don't completely understand the process by which we know God and how God measures out all of this life when he thinks about it, or she or the source thinks about it when our lives on this earth are done. And I find it to be a very complex, intriguing, and lovely subject to focus on. But if I just told you that, then again, you're going to measure and be like, I don't believe in God, or I do believe in God, and your only way to heaven is through Jesus Christ. And you're going to be very feeling about it. There's no chance that you're going to see things different. However, if you read the books that I've written, like the Luke and Time Mysteries, the very first book is about a woman and a man, and the woman's friendship with the man, and the realization that she comes to that she might have to make a choice, her life or his life. She may not be able to save both lives. And how does she work through that? And what is the conclusion of the book? So that actually came from a verse that I've thought a lot about in the Bible. I no longer know the source exactly. I believe it's in John, but greater love has nothing than this, that a man should lay down his life for a friend. And I'm probably slightly misquoting it, but that's close enough for government work or for church work. Anyways, that whole book was an exploration of what that actually looked like in the real world. And I created a representation of it through the 9 Lives of Marva de Longhai. I've gone on to write about other things that I'm curious about: revenge, blackmail, all kinds of really deep topics that I think about a lot, that I engage with. And doing that through stories, I have the ability to teach, to learn myself, and to engage in a deeper level. So all of that long kind of diversion is to set up the fact that when I go onto social media, I recognize for me that the best conversations I get to have with people are sharing my books with them. I'm not going to be as presentable, as interesting in a back and forth dialogue where I have to express an opinion and then hear your opinion and express my opinion and back and forth and back and forth. I love those dialogues. I love conversations. I've always been a debater. I enjoy those things, but I think the power is in the fiction. And so when I show up on social media, I show up knowing my primary goal is to get you into the books. If you're not interested in the books, I'm not a good fit for you, and that's okay. I think sometimes there's a level of confusion going on where people are just out to grow their numbers without thinking what those numbers mean, what those numbers represent. So for me, I've thought a lot about what those numbers mean. What does it mean when I have a follower? If that person follows me and I can't decide whether they're a bot or a real human being, and I can't decide whether they thought my comment on a reel about the Buffalo Bills was something worth following, if I build without discretion, without thinking about what I'm trying to achieve, what value is there in the audience? And so I'll tell a quick story. I started Twitter in March of 2022. I had an account for Luke, the private detective, and it was completely her. There was no me involved. It was her, and she responded the way that she would respond. And I built a really close followership, and I learned followership. Anyways, I built a close following, and I had friendships for people who thought they were friends with Luke, and DM'd back and forth, and never was like, oh, my name's Jody, I'm just pretending. And I created a close community there. But when I started as myself, I was really focused on building and growing. And what I learned from Luke was that if you ask a question on Twitter, people seem to really like that. And so I set out to post 10 tweets a day. And all 10 were questions that I would ask. And I went from 0 to 2,000 really fast. And I went from 2,000 to 5,000 at lightning speed. I grew my account so fast that I had people reaching out to me in the DMs and being like, how are you doing this? Can you share your strategy? The other part of it was that I was available to that platform to dialogue with people. So I was doing the right things. I was putting in the work. I was spending sometimes up to 8 hours a day on Twitter. And I felt great about it because I was building community as Jody J. Sperling, and I was surrounded by writers. But I'd made one critical mistake. Being surrounded by writers does not mean that you are being surrounded by targeted readers, people who are interested in reading your stuff. And this is probably a conversation for another day. But when you consider that you are surrounded by other independent, self-published authors, then you start to think, what are the thoughts going through my head about Indian self-published authors? And I've been totally transparent about this in the past. Self-publishing is a tenuous landmine of a landscape. There are so many self-published authors. Some are listening to this podcast right now who spend no money on editing, who spend no money on proofreading, who spend no money on cover design, who do everything DIY. And they don't do it really well. They don't spend time researching cover design. They don't spend time studying grammar books. They don't spend time looking into story structure. They just had an idea someday, like maybe from a dream or something they thought would be really neat after they saw a movie. And they sat down to write it. And congratulations, writing a book is really hard. But writing a book does not mean publishing a book. I've written numerous novels that will never see the light of day, as far as I know. I would have to do massive rewrites on so many of my shelf novels, but they taught me the process. I have a master's of fine arts in fiction writing. I have read grammar books. I am a grammar nerd. I love this stuff. And it's not me saying, oh, look at me, I'm doing great. You're over there not even studying. But it is me acknowledging that in order to go into this field, you're going to have some people who have masters of fine arts, who spent decades studying and writing and building the craft. And you're going to have people who had a dream and wrote 60,000 words, didn't proofread it, and just published it. And so self-publishing is a strange landscape. Those thoughts are going through my head when I'm interacting with people on Twitter. Also, when I'm interacting with people on Twitter, I'm not thinking, what new author am I going to read as a result of being on this platform today? I'm thinking, what new reader am I going to find? So I can interact all day long with authors, and it's not going through my mind that I'm going to buy their book. And a lot of times on Twitter, I would get people offering to do a swap. Let's do a review swap. Let's do this. Let's do that. But it was always, give me some of your time and I'll give you some time back. I have no issues with reciprocity. However, I mean, if you want to talk about a slow, impossible slog, go to a live in-person event and sell books to those people and realize that that is a slow form of selling books. Now do it one-on-one with people who are asking you to spend hours on their book in exchange for whatever they're going to do for your book. And there's some strange things that show up. You're never going to build a huge base doing that. I got all the way up to, I think I'm just past 30,000 followers right now on X. And the platform has been good to me in many ways. I have sold a lot of books. I've done episodes on how I was able to leverage what Twitter did do into sales, but it was so much work for so little return that I had to accept at some point, I need an alternative strategy. So I still use X. I don't use it as much as I used to, not by a long shot. I'm not even posting daily, which is something that I need to be doing. However, I'm still there. I'm still responding to comments. I'm still having dialogue, and I'm growing slowly. I'm not as focused on finding readers on X anymore because I think that a lot of the work I did building surrounded me, and it's impossible to do reciprocity. I do want to shout out a couple of authors that I met on there because they're a huge part of my story now, and I think it would be an incomplete picture not to mention how this works. The very talented, very gifted Christopher Tallon has a podcast for creatives. I'll link it in the show notes. It's a fantastic podcast. He talks to people all across the creative landscape. He wrote a book called Switchers. He and I did do a book swap a little bit later on. We were guests on each other's podcast for a while. He was a roving co-host of this show for a period of time. I changed so much that it's not like I told him he couldn't do it anymore. I just don't use the co-host format. At any rate, we did eventually swap. I read his book, rated it on Amazon. He read my book, rated it on Amazon. To the best of my knowledge, he hasn't read any of my other books, and I'm not asking him to. If he chooses to, he's more than welcome. But what I have gained from my friendship with Christopher is podcasting, learning, and dialoguing about that. We've attended shows together. I did a show in Michigan with him, and then I did a show in Chicago with him. We're going to do more shows in the future. And I've built a really good friendship. I think the guy is fantastic. Rich Hosek is the author of Bedtime Stories for Insomniacs. He was a roving co-host with me. I've read almost all of his books. He's a fantastic writer. He used to be a writer for television shows like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Star Trek Voyager. So he had a long career writing in film and TV before moving out to Chicago and really focusing on his novels. And his novels are exceptional. He's read, rated, and reviewed several of my books, and likewise, I've read, rated, and reviewed several of his books. So there is reciprocity that goes beyond and deeper. And when you find a friend that you jive with, it's great. I've done shows with Rich in Omaha, Milwaukee. We've got one coming up in the Twin Cities in a couple weeks, and it's great to have those friendships and have that access to somebody. I don't edit with these guys. I don't ask them to do like beta reads or anything. I'm not involved in that way. And I don't want to give out those services. I don't want to beta read for anyone. It would take something that I can't even think of to be a beta reader, because it's so much other stuff I'm trying to do. It wouldn't be fair to them, and it would take a lot of time for me. So that's all what was going on up until about 3 weeks ago. And I'd been listening to Gary Vaynerchuk for a long time. I originally hated the guy. But the more I listened, the more I realized his message really compelled me. And I wanted to do something, but it just felt amorphous. I didn't know how to do it. That's when I came across the strategy for Instagram. And so I started targeting accounts that were following mystery book readers / mystery book reviewers on Instagram, following some of them when they put in their byline or their headline that they liked mystery books. I would comment on their posts, I would like their posts, and I would engage with them. And when it felt like a good fit, I would give a follow. Sometimes you get a follow back, sometimes you don't. But doing that is targeting the kind of people who are out there in the open saying that they are a reader. I figure my chances of getting them to read my books is a lot better because they're not looking for reciprocity in most cases. All they're looking for is a great new book to read. I don't have tons of data to tell you right now this is for sure working, but I have a little bit of data. I'm not going to go over my stats from the previous weeks. So if you want to know how growth is going, then take a look at the previous weeks and you can refer back to that to see where I'm at now. What I can tell you is I've had a good week of follower growth on Instagram. I've had a great week for me on Reels reaching bigger audiences. And so I'm going to go over a couple of those numbers. Right now on Instagram, I have 659 followers. So I feel like that's a pretty significant growth. I talked last week about how at shows, I have a plaque out that gives you a QR code so that you can follow me right there on Instagram. And I'm using that assertively. If somebody starts talking about my books and they're like, these sound great, I'm going to walk around and think about it. How do I find you if I want to get your books? Or people who buy the first book in the series and like, when I read this, if I like it, how do I find the next book in the series? I'm not giving out my brochures anymore. I'm not, they're like postcard size. I'm not giving those out except for rare occasions. But what I am doing is saying, hey, here's a QR code for Instagram. Follow me and you can keep up to date with all of my books. You can find my website. You can find this, that, and the other. And that has worked to help me grow. I think I picked up probably a dozen new followers in Madison at the Tattoo Fest last week doing that. I'm also picking up new followers through some of the reels that I'm posting. So I think I've picked up probably another half dozen to 10 or so followers through reels that people just see the reel and decide to follow me. That's crazy. That's a behavior I never do, but there's people out there who do. And then the rest of the people that I've picked up have been from finding those readers, commenting, and getting them to follow back. So I'm following them and then they follow back. And I don't remember exactly where I was at, but like I said, more growth this past week than the week before. So I'm trending in the right direction. And the other thing that's pretty exciting is actually my stats on Reels. So last week, I think my best Reel reached 3,000 views, something like that. In fact, give me just a moment, and I will tell you what that Reel was. I think 3,577 views as of today on that Reel that I did last week that popped for me. Since then, the next Reels that I've done, I reached 2,187, 2,370, 2,978. Then I had a dud, then 2,701, 2,436, 2,271, 1,608. I had a dud. That dud was a personal reel that I did with my own face. People don't like seeing my face yet. Got to fix that. 2,186, couple of duds, 1,186, 1,479, 2,763, 1,643, and then the big one, 14,200 views on a reel that I posted this week. That one gained me a fair number of followers for its reach, and that was really exciting for me. The next reel I did after that reached 11,600. Then I went back down to kind of some smaller ones. Then I got one for 8,768, 2,385, 1,583, 1,468, 1,987, 1,599, and my newest reel has so far been seen by 192 eyeballs. So as I'm looking at that, I'm thinking the strategy seems to be working. Either Instagram is seeing the consistency and so they're pushing it a little bit harder, or I'm learning, and it's probably a mix of all of these, by the way, I'm learning the kinds of reels that people are interested in and being able to caption them in ways that relate to me, to being a writer, actually helping people to get to know me a little bit. And so I can hope that this growth continues and that I find kind of a new bottom. So it seems like after you get those ones that pop for you, then you kind of sink back down for sure again, but to a new higher bottom. So it is before, like 3,000 was huge for me. And now it seems like most of my reels are working their way up to that 3,000 as being the bottom. And if that's the case, then my consistency will reach a lot more people. Figuring out how to target readers through that is the one area that I'm still not sure I'm doing correctly, but it's better to do and fail than to not do. Next question. Last week, for all of my activity, I can speculate that I had one book sale, just one. This week, I have had one book sale. However, it came from my website and it was for my 4-book paperback deal. Do I know for sure that that person found me on Instagram? Of course I don't. Could they have had one of my brochures or flyers from a past show? Could they have gotten one from Madison Tattoo Fast this last week? Absolutely. I really don't know how they came to me. There's no way of tracking how that sale arrived, but I do know that I sold one book last week and I've sold 4 books this week, hoping that growth continues. I have not had any sales on Amazon this week, and I don't know how to fix that problem. So I'm still working at that actively. But that's what I've got going on right now. I'm going to continue, unless the world gets the best of me, to weekly update you on how this is going. I've got a couple of interviews in the pocket right now that I'll also be releasing. So this week, we may have a handful of times where I'm releasing multiple episodes. Hope that you've enjoyed this. Looking forward to hearing from some of you who are experiencing good growth or even feel stuck. I knew that was coming. And dialoguing with you. I would love nothing more than if you comment here on YouTube about your experience with this yourself. If you would comment on my Substack where my podcast is hosted, you can always follow me there. I've always got links for that in the Substack post in my podcast. Have a conversation with me. Let me know what works. I am 1,000% open to using strategies that are working for others, to sharing my strategies with you if you're an author. And again, you are authors. I'm talking to authors. I'm not here trying to sell you a book. If you want to buy my book, feel free. But I'm here talking to you about what's working for me, because I did find through all of my work on Twitter/X that I have a passion for this kind of thing. And I want to continue to do it. For whatever that's worth, I want to continue to create a podcast that talks about how to become a household name, that maybe you'll get a benefit as well. If you enjoy the podcast, do me a favor, give it a like on whatever platform you're listening on, give it a review, let people know about it. That's the way we grow. We'll talk to you soon. Becoming a household name won't happen overnight, but with your help, it can happen for me or for anyone you know who's on this journey. If you liked what you heard today, would you consider sharing this podcast with someone you know would love it too? Word of mouth is the single biggest difference maker for a dreamer's outcome. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. A few weeks ago, I traveled to Chicago for Printers Row Literary Festival, and it was a crapshoot. I left wondering if it was time to accept failure and move on. Over the past 3 years, I've had the same question, been confronted with the same challenge so many times. And if I'm honest, there's no one in my life telling me, Jody, keep going. I've wholly exhausted my supply of goodwill. So, on the way back from Chicago, I blew a tire. And because I'd used my tire iron to replace the tire on Ashley's car, forgetting to replace it in my van, I had no way to put on the spare. At that moment, I thought, I'm quitting. I'm done. This is stupid. God, the universe, the source, is telling me it's time to be done. I got home the next morning and I told Ashley, if I don't break by December, I'm out. By the end of that same week, the stubborn, quitless horror that is the novelist inside of me already dug its claws back in. And I've been thinking since then, I can't quit. I can't quit. They expect me to quit. They expect me to quit. I can't quit. I can't quit. There's no answer to be had, no peace, no resolution. Quit, and I'm hollow. Keep striving, and I'm exposed and vulnerable. Want a book? Buy one. You can find mine anywhere books are sold. And if they aren't in stock, ask a bookseller. They'll order it for you. Or don't. I can't quit whether you read what I've got to say or not. It's a disease like any other. Ask a person to quit drinking. Ask them to quit eating sugar. Ask them to quit showing up late for every damn thing. Ask them to go to bed on time. And if they say, that's different, laugh in their face and say, keep telling yourself that.